The challenges faced by Minnesota families after a year in a global pandemic showed us how vital childcare is to our economy. Working from home was complicated by our kids going to school from home. But the search for childcare has been an issue impacting our work lives even before the pandemic. For rural Minnesotans, access to childcare has been getting worse for at least 2 decades. In our report, A Quiet Crisis, we showed that childcare is no longer a luxury. In almost 80% of Minnesota families, all parents work. Childcare issues are the primary cause of absenteeism among American workers. A lack of childcare keeps workers from working. But the crisis isn't the same everywhere. In Minnesota, licensed childcare comes in 2 forms: center-based childcare and family-based or in-home childcare. Over the last 20 years, the number of people providing family childcare has been cut nearly in half. During that time, center-based childcare has been growing, but they haven't been growing consistently across the state. Between 2000 and 2020, the 7-county metro area lost almost 40,000 family childcare spaces. Growth in centers made up for that loss, almost, by adding 37,000 spaces. However, during that same time, Greater Minnesota lost over 35,000 family childcare spaces, but the growth of center care added only about 15,000 spaces. That's a deficit of 20,000 spaces. What happened? Well, a couple of things. For one, child care centers are harder to start up and keep going in smaller communities where there aren't as many children in the area. That's why rural areas rely so much on family providers. Second, family childcare providers have been leaving the business for a number of reasons, and the fact is, few people have been coming in to replace them. If we plot childcare on a map, we can see that childcare access is pretty sparse for most of Minnesota, in rural areas and even in urban centers. In fact, the Twin Cities suburbs are about the only place in the state that could be considered to have many childcare options. For 2 decades before the pandemic, childcare was becoming a serious challenge in Greater Minnesota. When the coronavirus came in 2020, the challenge turned into chaos. That's when everyone learned how vital childcare is to our economy. So as life starts getting back to normal, we have to make sure our current childcare system stays intact. Emergency childcare grants were a lifeline to providers and families through the pandemic, and more grants may come after a new round of federal stimulus money. Supplementing that money with special philanthropy funds from the private sector could help stabilize the childcare industry in the short term. Also, parents who lost their jobs will need help paying for childcare while they look for work or get into retraining programs for new careers. State programs like the Minnesota Family Investment Program and the Child Care Assistance Program may need to be expanded. But these are short-term fixes. How do we fix childcare for the long term? Here are a few ideas. First, we need to decide what childcare is. The way childcare is viewed right now, it's either a highly regulated private business or an underfunded public school. We have to decide which it is, because what we decide will guide our solutions. Family providers are the backbone of childcare in Greater Minnesota, yet we have half the number today that we had in 2000. Family providers are still the vital core of childcare in rural areas, and they need to be supported through public policy that makes it possible for them not just to survive, but to thrive. The reimbursement rates for the Child Care Assistance Program, a crucial source of revenue for providers, sat virtually frozen for 14 years while the expenses of childcare continued to climb. CCAP cannot be allowed to stagnate like that again. A child care desert premium added to the current reimbursement rate would help providers who operate in areas where it's difficult to keep a daycare going, either because the population density is too low or average incomes are too low. Finally, we need to make sure our solutions allow for creativity, flexibility, and experimentation across the state. There is no one-size-fits-all fix for this problem. Childcare solutions in Thief River Falls will look different than solutions in Inver Grove Heights. Rigid policy just ends up hurting Greater Minnesota childcare providers. For generations, childcare was viewed as a luxury. But we've seen, in 2020 and 2021, just how crucial caring for our children is to our economy. As we emerge from the global pandemic, we need to tackle the childcare crisis in Greater Minnesota so the whole state can get back to work together. To learn more about childcare in Greater Minnesota and other issues impacting Minnesotans outside the metro, visit ruralmn.org.